The Florida sun beat down on my neck, even through the slight tint of the window. I watched Mrs. Karen Thompson, president of our HOA, strut up my driveway, her black blazer looking like a heat trap in this weather. Clipboard clutched in her hand, she looked like she was about to deliver a death sentence, not a piece of paper. Me. I was Tay, and these streets, this neighborhood, were my domain. I wasn't just another homeowner, I was a goddamn king, even if Karen and her cronies couldn't stomach the sight of me. Word had gotten back to me, naturally. Whispers carried on the wind, fueled by nervous neighbors and the very real aura of power that clung to my crew. Karen had been spearheading this beautification initiative, Code 4, get rid of the element that doesn't fit our aesthetic. And guess who she thought didn't fit? Me, my crew, and the subtle but undeniable fact that my existence challenged her carefully curated reality. She couldn't stand the fact that I, a black man who rose from nothing to own not just one, but multiple properties in this neighborhood, was now a thorn in her perfectly manicured side. I wasn't stupid. I knew she saw me as a threat, a disruptor to her fragile little world. I exhaled, the smoke from my blunt curling towards the ceiling. "Company's here," I announced to Dre and Malik, who were lounging on the couch, eyes glued to the TV. "Looks like the Queen's come to collect her taxes." They exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. They were always ready, loyal to a fault, and understood the unspoken rules of our world. Dre cut off the TV, and Malik stood up, cracking his knuckles. "You want us to answer the door, Tay?" Dre asked, his voice low and menacing. I waved them off. "Nah, I got this. Let her come to me. It'll be more fun that way." I took one last drag from my blunt, then snuffed it out in the ashtray. I stood up, stretched, and walked towards the front door, a smile playing on my lips. It was time to play Karen's game, but on my terms. I opened the door before she even had a chance to knock. Her eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her face before she regained her composure. "Mr. Taylor," she said, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "I have something for you." She held out the clipboard, the eviction papers prominently displayed. "Regarding your recent activities and alleged violations of the HOA guidelines." I cut her off with a chuckle. Karen, I said, shaking my head. "You really think a piece of paper is gonna scare me? You really think you can just waltz onto my property and tell me what to do?" My smile vanished, replaced by a hard, cold stare. "You're playing a dangerous game, Karen. A very dangerous game." Karen's face paled slightly, but she stood her ground. "Mr. Taylor, these are legal documents. You are in violation of several HOA rules and regulations. We have received numerous complaints about noise, property maintenance, and..." She paused, her eyes flicking around the yard as if searching for evidence of my supposed transgressions. "General disturbances." "Disturbances?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Me breathing? Me existing in your pristine little white picket fence fantasy?" I stepped closer, invading her personal space. She flinched, taking a step back, but I held my ground. "Let me make something clear, Karen. This is my house. My property. I earned this shit. And I'm not going anywhere. Not for you, not for your precious HOA, not for anyone." I flicked the eviction papers with my finger. These are just pieces of paper. Meaningless. You want to play hardball, Karen? Let's play hardball. But don't come crying to me when you realize you're outmatched. Dre and Malik appeared behind me, flanking me like silent guardians. Their presence was a subtle but unmistakable threat. Karen's eyes darted between them and me, her bravado visibly crumbling. "I'm just doing my job," she stammered, her voice losing its initial confidence. "The HOA has a responsibility to uphold the community standards. Community standards? I scoffed. Or your prejudice standards? Let's be honest, Karen. This isn't about noise complaints or lawn maintenance. This is about you not liking the fact that a black man owns a house in your neighborhood. This is about you wanting to maintain your little bubble of white privilege. I reached out and snatched the clipboard from her hands. I ripped the eviction papers in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. Consider this your final warning, Karen. Back off. Leave me and my crew alone. And if you don't. I let the threat hang in the air, unspoken but understood. You'll regret it. Karen stood there, speechless, staring at the shredded papers at her feet. The color had completely drained from her face. She looked like she was about to faint. Finally, she found her voice, a weak, trembling whisper. You can't do this. This isn't over. Oh, I assure you, Karen, I said, my voice dangerously low. It is over. For you. I watched as she turned and hurried back towards her car, her steps unsteady. I turned to Dre and Malik. Make sure she gets the message, I said, a predatory glint in my eyes. A message she won't soon forget. They nodded, their faces grim. The game had just begun, and Karen was about to learn that she had picked the wrong fight. This wasn't just about eviction papers, it was about respect, about power, and about sending a clear message that we wouldn't be intimidated, we wouldn't be pushed around, and we wouldn't back down. Watching Karen's car pull away, I felt a sense of satisfaction, but also a simmering anger. This woman, with her entitlement and her unmasked racism, had been a constant source of irritation for too long. It was time to put an end to it, not just for me, but for everyone else in the neighborhood who had been subjected to her petty tyranny. Dre and Malik moved with a swift efficiency born of years of practice. I didn't need to tell them the particulars, they understood the assignment. They moved stealthily, disappearing behind the hedges that lined my property. I went back inside, poured myself a drink, and waited. I knew they would handle things. They always did. It wasn't long before I heard a commotion outside. A high-pitched shriek pierced the air, followed by a string of invectives. Stepping outside, I saw Karen standing next to her car, her face contorted with rage. All 4 tires were slashed, flattened against the asphalt. She was screaming, pointing at my house, her voice raw with fury. You did this, she shrieked, her eyes blazing with hatred. You goddamn thugs. I'm going to call the police. You're going to jail. Dre and Malik emerged from the shadows, their faces expressionless. You have a problem, ma'am? Dre asked, his voice deceptively calm. These hoodlums slashed my tires. Karen sputtered, pointing at them with a shaking finger. I saw them. I know it was them. Malik stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Karen. Maybe you should watch where you're walking, lady. This neighborhood can be dangerous. Especially for people who go around making false accusations. Karen, realizing she was outnumbered and outmatched, began to back away. You haven't heard the last of this, she screamed as she turned and began running down the street, away from my house. I'll get you for this. You hear me? I'll get you all. As she ran, she unleashed a torrent of racial slurs, her true colors on full display. The words hung in the air, vile and poisonous. I shook my head, disgusted. Some people never learn, I muttered. Dre and Malik exchanged a look. What now, Tay? Dre asked. Now, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, we let her stew. Let her call the police. Let her rant and rave. Because we're just getting started. I knew that slashing her tires was just a minor inconvenience, a symbolic gesture. But it was enough to send a message. A message that we wouldn't be bullied, we wouldn't be intimidated, and we wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. Karen had drawn first blood, but she had underestimated us. Now, she was about to pay the price. I knew Karen would call the police. It was predictable, almost comical. The image of her, sputtering and red-faced, trying to explain the situation to some bewildered officer brought a grim satisfaction. I made sure Dre and Malik were out of sight, back inside the house. I wasn't worried about the cops finding anything, we were meticulous. Sure enough, within an hour, a police car pulled up to my curb. 2 officers emerged, looking bored and slightly annoyed. I walked out to meet them, putting on my most charming demeanor. "Officer," I said, extending my hand. "Tay Taylor. Can I help you?" "We received a call about some vandalism," one of the officers said, his eyes scanning my property. "A Mrs. Thompson reported that her tires were slashed, and she claims you were involved." "Vandalism?" I asked, feigning surprise. "That's terrible. Who would do something like that?" I played the innocent card, knowing it was my best defense. "Mrs. Thompson. I know her. She's the HOA president. We've had a few disagreements in the past, but nothing serious." The other officer, a woman with a weary expression, spoke up. "Mrs. Thompson stated that she saw your associates slash her tires." "Associates?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Officer, I'm a businessman. I have employees, contractors, people coming and going all the time. I can't be responsible for what everyone does." I paused, then added with a touch of concern, "You know, Mrs. Thompson can be a bit excitable. Perhaps she misidentified someone." The officers exchanged a look, clearly unsure what to make of the situation. They knew Karen's reputation. She had called them multiple times before, usually over petty grievances and perceived slights. They also knew that I was a respected member of the community, despite my unorthodox background. "We're going to have to take a statement from Mrs. Thompson," the male officer said. "And we may need to speak to your associates as well." "Of course, officer," I said, nodding politely. "I'm happy to cooperate in any way I can." I knew they didn't have anything on me. Karen's word against mine, with no concrete evidence, wasn't enough to get a warrant, let alone an arrest. As the officers went to question Karen, I went back inside my house. This was just a distraction, a minor inconvenience. The real game was about to begin. While the police were busy investigating a minor act of vandalism, I was setting the stage for Karen's downfall. I had people working on uncovering her dirty secrets, her hidden agendas, the skeletons in her closet. I knew that everyone had something to hide, and Karen was no exception. It was just a matter of finding it, exposing it, and watching her carefully constructed world crumble around her. My network was vast and discreet. Within hours, they had dug up more dirt on Karen Thompson than I had anticipated. It wasn't just garden-variety HOA corruption and petty power plays. It was far more significant. My guys uncovered financial irregularities within the HOA, specifically funds embezzled over the past few years, funneled into a private offshore account with Karen as the sole beneficiary. The amounts were substantial, enough to land her in serious federal trouble. I sat back, considering my options. I could have simply handed the evidence over to the police. But that would be too easy, too predictable. I wanted to make an example of her, to show everyone that abusing power and targeting people based on prejudice had consequences. I decided to play a longer game. I leaked the information, not to the police directly, but to a local investigative journalist known for his tenacity and his willingness to take on powerful figures. I packaged the information carefully, anonymizing the source to protect my network, and made sure it landed in his inbox at precisely the right moment. The journalist, eager for a scoop, started digging. He confirmed the offshore account, traced the funds, and uncovered a web of shady transactions. Within days, the story broke, sending shockwaves through the community. HOA president accused of embezzlement, the headlines screamed. Karen Thompson's face was plastered all over the news, her reputation in tatters. The police, now under immense public pressure, had no choice but to launch a full-scale investigation. They raided her house, seized her financial records, and questioned her and her associates. The evidence was overwhelming. Karen Thompson was arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. Watching the news unfold, I felt a sense of cold satisfaction. Karen Thompson had tried to destroy me, to push me out of my home, to deny me my rightful place in the community. Now, she was facing the consequences of her actions. Her carefully constructed world of privilege and power had crumbled around her, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. I had not just defended myself, I had exposed her, her hypocrisy, and her blatant disregard for the law. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. The evidence against Karen was irrefutable. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, she had no choice but to plead guilty. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, along with a hefty fine and the forfeiture of all the embezzled funds. The HOA was thrown into chaos. Members, previously silent and cowed by Karen's authority, were now demanding answers and accountability. A new election was held, and a diverse group of homeowners, representing the true demographics of the community, were elected to the board. They immediately set about reforming the HOA, implementing stricter financial controls, and ensuring that all residents were treated fairly and with respect. I watched the changes unfold with a quiet satisfaction. I had not only defended myself, but I had also helped to create a more just and equitable community. The neighborhood breathed a sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and intimidation that Karen had fostered began to dissipate. People started talking to each other, organizing community events, and building genuine relationships. One evening, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the cool evening air, when a young black family walked by. They stopped in front of my house, and the father approached me. "Mr. Taylor," he said, extending his hand. "I just wanted to thank you. For everything you did. For standing up to that woman and for fighting for our community." I shook his hand, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "It was the right thing to do," I said. "No one should be treated like that. Everyone deserves to feel safe and welcome in their own home." As they walked away, I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. I had used my power, not for personal gain or revenge, but to protect my community and to fight for justice. Karen Thompson's reign of terror was over, and a new chapter had begun. A chapter of inclusivity, respect, and community. And I, Tay Taylor, was proud to have played a part in writing it. My life wasn't perfect, my methods weren't always clean, but I had learned that true power wasn't about intimidation or control. It was about using your influence to create positive change. And that was a legacy I could live with.